Welcome to this course on Alpha Children. Our children are presenting much differently than the children of yesteryear. They appear more independent, stronger, even more mature at times. Is this really true, or is it an illusion? I believe it's an illusion. I believe there is something deeper going on, more systemic going on, that is at the core of this presentation, and that is our subject today and for this course. When I first attempted to put the puzzle pieces together of attachment, what emerged was a realization that children were coming to revolve around their peers rather than their parents and teachers, the adults responsible for them. That when I came to realize this, this led to the book on Hold On to Your Kids, in where I focus on peer orientation. But when I looked at the material again, and I've continued to study this material, another phenomena has emerged. And it's not enough for children to simply be attached to the adults responsible for them. They need to be attached in the right way. Many of our children are now in the lead. Prescriptive, bossy, telling their parents what to do. And this is exactly the phenomena that I want to address. The lead role was meant for us as parents and teachers. Somehow we are losing our rightful place in their lives. And this is creating difficulties for all concerned, for them and for us. In many ways, this is a much bigger phenomena than even peer orientation. Not only must children revolve around their adults and teachers, parents and teachers, but they must be attached in the right mode. It would seem that we have lost this dance, probably as a result of a reaction to the authoritarian parenting of yesteryear. Many of the adults reacted to this. There was a focus on egalitarian relationships. There was an attempt to democratize the family, but it appears as if we took a wrong turn. It appears as if we moved too far, or we lost something essential in the process, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Basically, is that we have lost something very essential in that process, in understanding of the nature of human relationships, and especially of child-adult relationships. This dynamic affects every arena of relationships. It affects marriage. In fact, I think once this dynamic begins to be understood, it sheds light on much of our dance in marriage. It affects friendship. You see it in politics. You see it in religion. In fact, once your eyes are open to it, you see it everywhere. It's very much like peer orientation. We had no word for it. When I coined the term peer orientation, only a number of researchers had named it before, but there was no public consciousness of this. And because there was no public consciousness of it, we didn't see it. Because without language, we have no awareness. And the same thing is true for this. We have no word for this. One step removed from the animal world, we see it clearly. We have no problems with seeing it at all. And we have called it the alpha instincts, and we have no hesitation to do so. But for some reason, we are blinded to this in our own human relationships, as I will talk about it later, probably because of our very strong values around egalitarian relating, is that we're completely blinded to this. We have no term for it, and because we have no term, we have no self-consciousness around it. I have chosen the term alpha children. It's difficult, just like peer orientation. I couldn't name the book Peer Orientation because nobody knew what it was. Hopefully with the term alpha children, there's at least that sense at least intuitive sense, that this is children looking to be number one, to be in the first place, to displace others, and so on. And then as we have the language, we will find more consciousness around it and to be able to find our rightful place, reclaim our rightful place, as the subtitle says, in their lives. Our first part of this, the first session, is to try and make sense of alpha. Before we do so, we'll take a look at some of the most common alpha instincts, very, very basic instincts. And the thesis here is that there exists in every single one of us, not only us, every single mammal, deep natural instincts that under the right conditions move us to be first or number one, move us to take over, to take charge, to take the lead. That there exists in every single one of us deep natural instincts under the right conditions to be on top or take center stage. You'll also know individuals that are characterized by these instincts. It's there all the time, not only under certain conditions, but there's a certain stuckness to these instincts, and we'll talk about that as well. There are instincts to trump interaction, to whether it's by voice or otherwise, to have the last word, to be in the know, and to know more than others, and to displace or resist being displaced physically, emotionally, and psychologically. I've struggled for a number of years now to try to get to the essence of this dynamic. What is at the bottom of this? What is the essence? And I think it is the issue of displacement. I hope that in a few months I don't think differently, and I've discovered it because I'm creating this course now. And so hopefully I'm right. This would have to be true across the animal universe. I had an opportunity to witness this process take place. We had a very young kitten introduced to our menagerie of pets in our home. Alpha had already well been established by Kelly, the senior cat, and Whiskey, the dog, and then came this little kitten. And for some reason or another, this little kitten resisted being displaced. Kelly would try to whip her, would paw her, would push her around, would growl at her, and this kitten just moved right into it as, just, you can't move me. And then as soon as the dominant cat would give up, the little kitten moved right to take her place and all her favorite places. She sniffed them out, and she sat in those places. She displaced Callie over probably 2 weeks' time and refused to be displaced. Now, Callie is quite a gentle cat, quite alpha. As soon as I wake up in the morning, she'll look to lay right on top of me and establish who's boss, just like many cats do. They have very, very strong alpha instincts. But once we have established a relationship, I get up, I go to my office chair where she makes sure she sits first, and then when she sees I'm ready to sit down, she will jump off. Not so that little kitten would absolutely, you know how cats are when they refuse to be picked up, when they're absolutely resisting, and she refused to be displaced. It's an issue of displacement. We displace with the eyes. We displace with the voice. We displace in games. We refuse to be displaced. It seems to me a very, very basic instinct. And what I am saying is children are coming to displace their parents in all kinds of ways, and their teachers. Now, some of it is because of technology. We can't help it. They know more. They can access Google faster than we can. They know how to work all of those kinds of things. They're far more knowledgeable. It used to be that adults and teachers not only knew more, they were in control of the information that was given. We've lost that place completely. We've been displaced. And there's no way back on that one. But there's something much more fundamental that is going on. Now, we can't really address a problem we don't understand. And that's our first challenge, is to really make sense of this. And so our first session, the theme of this first session in it is to be able to get underneath it, to understand it, to make sense of it, and specifically to uncover the natural intended purpose of the alpha instincts. From a developmental point of view, and I represent a developmental science here for you, from a developmental point of view, we do not, like the medical approach, start from the position of disorder. We start from a deep, deep faith that there is order in the universe. This is not a mistake. There is a reason. And so the issue is then, what is the reason? How does this make sense? Not that it is nonsense, but how does it make sense? So developmentalist starts in a much different way. Now, there have been individuals and theorists who have been trying to make sense of this for a long time. How do we make sense of this drive to dominate? How do we make sense? Friedrich Nietzsche created the most overarching theory of this, and he labeled it as the drive for power. And that still stands as the prevailing idea today, that it is a drive for power, and that we are power hungry. And when someone trumps the interaction, when they seek to be in control, they are going for power, and it's a power struggle. And in fact, most of the material around bullies simply assumes that the bully, and we'll see that as one of the alpha manifestations later on, one of the perverted alpha manifestations, is going for power. In fact, some definitions are that it's when there's an inequality of power that the problem is. This is all based on Friedrich Nietzsche's theories of power. It doesn't hold any water. When you actually get to talk to these individuals, I worked with institutions full of them. It had nothing to do with power whatsoever. Adler built his theory on Nietzsche's thesis. And Adler has had a huge influence in terms of bringing it to the parent-child relationship. And he used power, he brought power as one of the 4 dominant drives in children. And he recommended that parents nip this in the bud right away. Any move to dominate was to be nipped in the bud, and it was to be cut out. And in fact, you were to withdraw affection and withdraw a sense, your love, until the child straightened out. He saw this as the enemy of what he called social interest. This was the enemy of proper relating. And it's in his work that we find the great democratization of the family, in which there was great concern to level the relationships as that parents were no more than children. Again, this has greatly influenced our thinking today. One of Alfred Adler's students, Thomas Millar, a Canadian, wrote the book The Omnipotent Child and brought it to its extreme. In the sense is in the omnipotent child, the child who quests for power, who seeks to dominate. Again, that you need to give severe consequences to this child to be able to solve that issue. And so we've seen the alpha instincts in a very negative light. We call people who exhibit alpha behavior often as control freaks, bossy pants. We see them sometimes as entitled. Adler perceived it as a quest for superiority, and in fact did a study of Hitler based on that basis. Or as having an attitude of needing to be pulled down a peg or two. People who can't mind their own business, and so on and so on and so on. And so we see it basically, we have pathologized it, we've seen it as a disorder that is something wrong. I want to suggest to you something completely different. I want to suggest to you that the alpha instincts were intended, they were designed, they have a wonderful purpose. They can become perverted. They can be out of place, just like all our instincts can be out of place. But in their place, they have reason. And they are in all of us. And the key to understanding this, of course, is attachment. The key to making sense of alpha is attachment. And that's something that Nietzsche, that Adler, and that many of the theorists had no exposure to. They had no background of. In fact, only in the last 50 years has this consciousness come to us that we've been able to understand that which is closest to us. And so if you've been exposed to my material before, you'll find attachment covered in many places. In fact, it is one of the core constructs in the attachment-based developmental approach that I articulate. But I'll just review it here very briefly in the context of understanding alpha. First of all, attachment is all about the pursuit of proximity. It's all about the quest for contact and closeness, the drive for connection, for belonging, for significance. In other areas, other courses, I talk about the 6 different ways that we seek contact and closeness and how the capacity for a relationship needs to be developed in a child. And that the first 6 years are very, very critical for the unfolding of this as a capacity for relationship begins to develop. And so attachment is about the pursuit of proximity. And it's true for all other mammals as well, other creatures as well. Proximity is the first and preeminent need, even more important than hunger. It is a preeminent need. It's when children are close that are more likely to be fed. Their survival is based upon their ability to preserve the contact and closeness and connection. And so in humans, this is recapitulated in many, many ways. But the issue is, what is the purpose of attachment? Why? Why? Once you understand attachment, it isn't that hard to figure out. The reason for attachment, the purpose for it, is to facilitate dependency, to facilitate the taking care of our offspring. It's to render the offspring of the organism dependent upon the adult, and the adult to equip and enable to take care of. So how is this to be done? How is this to be done? If the purpose is of attachment to facilitate the taking care of, if that is what it is about, how is this to be done? And that's where you follow to the third part of this. To do this, it necessitates a hierarchical arrangement. Attachment is hierarchically arranged, because that is what it is for. Now, when Aristotle, first of all, observed that man is a social animal, a social creature, he perceived it in terms of himself and his friends and his cronies. He was a man, and like many men still today, their relationships in terms of their perceptions, in terms of their particular peers and friends, it seemed to be more significant than their connection in their family. It was a relationship, it was a theory created by men about social relationships. Now, the word social connotes equal. And so for thousands of years, we have understood, yes, that we are social creatures, but we've also always thought of that as in terms of our equals. What we didn't perceive and what was camouflage and what Aristotle didn't get and what many still do not get today in contemporary textbooks is that attachment is primarily for families, for adults to take care of their offspring, for a teacher to take care of their students. It is hierarchical, not social. Now, there was another problem. When this, first of all, was understood, in fact, the word attachment was coined by Bowlby in Britain, in England, when it was coined by him, and the word attachment there to differentiate it from the construct that we are a social creature. And so the word attachment was there, and it was quite clear that this was meant to be hierarchical between children and adults and those taking care of them, and all hierarchical relationships. John Bowlby realized that this was going to be a hard sell. He realized that there was such a value of independence, that there would be no way that he could perpetrate a theory of dependence, because it was not politically correct. And that's exactly what happened, is that there was such resistance to the idea, though already 50 years ago, the number one issue in raising children, the idea is that everything had to do with fostering independence. In fact, the behaviorists started their manifesto in the 1950s with this idea, and this idea that today still reigns among many individuals, is that you must not do anything for a child that they could or should do for themselves. Otherwise, you will simply reinforce dependence. And dependence is the enemy. And so for the idea of attachment to be about facilitating dependence, this was very, very difficult to accept. Now, on the other side of the world, another theorist at the same time created his own theory of attachment. His name is Tokyo Doi. And he's Japanese. And he also perceived, without knowing anything about the attachment theorists in Europe, he also perceived that the world revolves around attachments. Attachments is a preeminent thing. It defines relationships. We seek to be with each other. And he wrote a book, and it's simply called The Anatomy of Dependence. But for those of you who know the Japanese culture, there is dignity in dependence. They are not afraid of dependence. They perceive dependence as natural. And so he was able to write a book about this and about attachment theory. And yet from Europe, this was impossible to do. And so we see this clash. And I believe it's behind our blindness today. We simply don't see the truth about attachment. And that truth about attachment is that it's hierarchically arranged and for the purpose of facilitating caretaking. And when we get that, then it makes sense. In keeping with the ultimate purpose of attachment, there are two sets of complementary instincts. Two sets of complementary instincts. Alpha and dependent. We don't see, I'm having to create words for these things. And that's the problem. Having to create words, but we'll call it alpha and dependent, and two sets of corresponding drives. And this is where it's important to understand, what is the purpose of this? Well, it becomes very, very clear when you understand what the purpose of attachment is. There is seeking for contact and closeness, for comfort, seeking for significance, seeking for love and belonging, seeking for being known, being understood, and there is providing the answer to it. So there is the seeking and there is the providing, and that is the primary purpose of the alpha, is to be the provider of what it is that our offspring, our children require, to be their answer. One is the answer to the other. This is the ancient human dance. It's always been here. And like any dance, there must be a lead. And unless there's a good lead, you do not have a following. And there must be a good lead, and that is the human dance. The human dance is hierarchically arranged. As soon as you take out that true dance and you get to flatlining the relationships and leveling it out, you get what we have as contemporary dance, which happened around the 1960s and so on. And then there is no lead anymore. That's not the dance we were meant for. We were meant for a dance in which there is a natural kind of hierarchy. And we needn't be afraid of this. If the hierarchical arrangements are fulfilled, the result, the fruit of it is a spirit of democracy. We've been afraid of it because we think if we reinforce hierarchical relating, then we'll never get to egalitarian relating. And so we're busy even in kindergarten trying to get our children to be able to relate as equals. And we made a huge mistake. Children were never meant to be put with their equals. Nothing in nature would suggest that. And there's not another creature that does that. We alone, because of our contrived society, and our idea that because we want an outcome to have to do with equality, we got to start when they're young. This is not the way it is. They have dependency needs that need to be met before they will ever move to become independent. And we needn't be afraid of this. But you can see this is not politically correct. This is developmentally accurate, but not politically correct. But science is not necessarily politically correct. It is meant to have its own life. But it does make it more difficult to talk about, more difficult to use words because these words are negative in our minds. Hierarchy is negative. Dependent is negative. These words are very difficult. But this is a crystalline dance of attachment. It was meant to be this way, despite our contrived ideas that there is something wrong with it. Let me illustrate it this way. Is again, we don't come together in attachment like this. We simply don't because there are no instincts to come like this. When we attach to each other, as we move to find connection, nature has to move us to an interface. It has to evoke alpha instincts in one and dependent instincts in another, and that's our interface. Now in friendship with equals, so-called equals, and in marriage, it can be reciprocal. But it always is that interface. In terms of children and adults, it's meant to be quite consistent, this interface, but that is where closeness is. In other words, nature has to do the tip up, and this and the deference, there has to be this kind of interaction. If it is not there, you don't really get the kind of contact and closeness. The dance doesn't evolve. And some of you know what that's like in marriage. Is that you try and do two dependent together and there's competition. Two alpha, you both try to drive the car at the same time, both take the lead in the dance, both the lead in the walk at the same time, and you just trip all over each other. It simply doesn't work, even in so-called equal relationships. Because that's not what attachment is about. Now, as far as you're your own person and you relate to another, yes, because that is naturally about equality. But in terms of attachment, it's about caretaking. It's to take care of the other, and that is by necessity hierarchically arranged. And so because that's a predominant dynamic in marriage and friendship, what would justify its existence if it wasn't to take care of each other? That's even our vows, is to take care of each other. It is about attachment that determines the kind of relationship. So we have the defendant instincts, which are to get one's bearings, to serve and obey, to seek assistance, to look up to belong, to follow, to wait for orders. It's all in this kind of posture. To look for guidance, to comply and conform, it's all in this kind of posture, in that kind of dependent place. And then the alpha instincts are to be its answer. And that is key, is to be its answer. And so the dependent instincts are the seeking for the answer to all of these needs. And so the provider, the instincts are to orient, to inform, to protect, to defend, to guide and direct, to look out for, to possess, to lead, to give the orders, to transmit one's values, to command and prescribe. But what if these alpha instincts are the predominant ones in a child? And you can see the problem. You can see the problem. How does the dance happen? Now, what is meant to be is a good alpha presence, a good provider presence is meant to inspire the seeking. You present yourself as you're the answer. And you know when you encounter a strong alpha presence, it automatically, to even relate to such a person, you must go into the dependent position, because there's no way to relate to actually them. And it moves and it inspires this to depend upon them, to trust in them. And if you encounter a strong dependent, one with, deer caught in the headlights, not sure who they are, and what to do, it should evoke a strong alpha presence in you. And that's the whole idea, is that one inspires the other. Now, to show you the strength of these instincts, again, many of us think that if we can get kindergarten children relating around round tables, so to speak, relating with their equals,